into tangible, constructive results is very important. Now, let me just say this, too. As our panelists are going to make clear, this story is by no means in this final chapter. It's an ongoing. After the scene that you see in the screen up there, Jamar Clark, we suffered a community loss of a wonderful young man named Philando Castile and many, many others. And let me tell you, I've been to Hill School, and had the opportunity to meet Philando's mom, and just really beautiful young man in many ways. The kids loved him. He ran their lunch program, and he provided nourishment to them, and not just nourishment, but like a feeling of belonging and acceptance, you know. But the real question is not, is there going to be crisis? The real question is, what are we going to do about it? We cannot let Philando Castile, Jamar Clark, or for that matter, anybody, just lose their life and, close the book on it. And our panelists today are going to tell what I think is an important story. And I know they're not going to just tell you all the highlights. They're going to tell you the lowlights, too, because it was a real serious struggle. And before I wrap up my comments and hand it to my panel, I just want to say this. I remember the days when Misha and others and Wintana were leading community in front of the 4th Precinct. It was super cold. Resources were low. I'm sure they'll tell you the story about how the whole thing kind of kicked off. But at the end of it was courage, it was bravery, and it was kinetic energy, and they demonstrated a tremendous ability to make good decisions on the fly. Is that a fair statement? And so it had an organic kind of spontaneous element to it, which they'll elaborate on. To go from there to a united black legislative agenda with unprecedented resources being channeled into the black community to address historic inequality. I don't have any colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus who can tell that story. But all of them can tell a story about Jamar Clark. They can tell you about Freddie Gray. They can tell you about Mike Brown. They can tell you about all that pain. But moving that crisis to collaboration in a meaningful way that will sustain over time is a chapter we're still trying to write. So enough preaching from me. You have people who are on the ground doing it every single day. I'm mindful of the fact that my constituents elect me to come to Washington, D.C. for half the week, so I cannot be on the ground like they are. But they were on the ground, and they were making it happen, not just on Plymouth Avenue, but in the Minnesota State Legislature as well. And I'm incredibly proud of it, and I talk about it all the time. So let me just ask, Valerie, would you like to join the panel, or would you like to make comments after? We'd like you to join the panel, but we don't want to put any pressure on you to do so. If you'd rather just, okay, I just did it. You may not want to put pressure, but you just put pressure. Come on up. Everybody give her a hand as she's coming up. And I just want to let you all know that the Judge Glenda Hatchett is here with us. She is Ms. Castile's lawyer, but before she ever was handling this case, she was dispensing justice in a wonderful way on television screens all across America. But before she ever did that, she was fighting for justice in our courts in the state of Georgia. And Judge Hatchett, if you'd like to join us, we would be honored to have you. We can play it either way. You'll be the first question we go to, or you can be on the panel itself. What's your preference? Come on up. We got a little space for you. Come on up. Yeah. So come on up, and somebody make sure. So come on up, and let me just say this. So I'm going to now just introduce our panelists. But right before I do, I just want to set a little bit more context. We have one more seat down here, you guys. Oh, yeah, her client, yeah. So I just want to say this, just context-wise. In Minnesota, Minnesota's sort of funny because when I talk to my colleagues, they all sort of have this impression that we don't have any problems in Minnesota. But when you start telling them about the reality, they're like, wow, that sounds like Mississippi, you know? So here's the reality. High school, in Minnesota, African-American income was about $31,000 a year until it fell to $27,000 a year. Average median income in Minnesota is $61,000 a year. Unemployment across the state of Minnesota is low for the whole nation. My colleagues come to me and say, how do y'all get your unemployment so low? I'm like, well, you know, it is good that Minnesota's unemployment rate is very low. For African Americans, it's really super high. 16% for African Americans, about 3.7% statewide. We are looking at deprivation in the land of plenty. That is the reality of Minnesota. And that's why you got to disaggregate these statistics, because if you don't, you could be under the impression that everybody got 3 or 4 houses and a lake house, and you know what I mean? But that's not the reality of so many people. As I mentioned before, we are dealing with nation-leading disparities for African Americans in incarceration, unemployment, poverty, serious. So when we talk about Jamar Clark and Philando's crisis and the tragedy that happened to them, it happened within an ecosystem. It wasn't just one plant. It was a plant in the context of a forest, if you understand the analogy I'm trying to make. Philando, for example, was stopped 52 times. Who gets stopped 52 times? Well, a black person in Minnesota. You know what I mean? And had a license to carry. And yet this tragedy unfolded with him. So with that, I just want to say that we have a wonderful panel, and I just want to introduce you to them. I know them all, and I can introduce them on my own, but I'm looking for the sheet that my staff gave me, which I cannot find. But I will just say, so then I just got to go for it that way. Let me just start out by introducing Misha Grimm. Misha Grimm was a leading voice in Black Lives Matter. She not only is an awesome protest organizer, but she negotiated in a very insightful and tough way with everybody from the governor on down. Misha Grimm, everybody give her a hand. Wintana Melican, who I've been knowing for many years, I feel like she's one of our bright lights along with Misha in our community. Wintana is a leader in an organization called Neighborhoods Organizing for Change. They're on Broadway. They are a take no prisoners, fight back, we're not scared kind of organization. And Wintana is leading the band with her colleagues. They work on everything from environmental justice to housing to police accountability, and she'll tell you all the rest. I'm sure I left out many important things that they're doing. Now, give her a hand. Now, Jeff Hassan is my big brother. I love him just as much as if my mother and his mother was the same person. He and I practiced law together, and when I was a law student, Jeff was a young lawyer, and he came to talk to the Black Law Students Association, and he really became a mentor to not just me, but many, many others of us. He is an excellent attorney. If I ever had a problem, I'd call him, Jeff Hassan, everybody. But let me just say one more thing about Jeff. Jeff isn't just limited to the law. He actually co-authored a book on African American education, and is a leader in the Muslim community as well. So one more hand for Jeff. Now I'd like to introduce you to a young lady who did not choose to inject herself into the burning issues of the day. Valerie Castile was a mother of a lovely young man who did nothing more than try to lead his life and be a great parent to his girlfriend's daughter, and a great leader in the school that he worked in, where he was the lunchroom supervisor, and yet when her son was killed, she went from basically being a private citizen minding her own business to being a national figure who had to speak for a generation, which in some ways is desperately unfair, but of course none of us know what fate is going to choose for us. She has acquitted herself with tremendous dignity in the role, and I want you to greet her, Valerie Castile. I already introduced Judge Hatchett a little bit. You know, if you ever watch Court TV or Judge TV, you know she's one of the best at it. She's she gives Judge Judy a run for her money, y'all, and all the rest of them too. But sometimes you can watch these shows and think, well, this is more entertainment than law. No, don't get it twisted. She is a expert in the law, a tremendous advocate. She's the attorney for the Castile family. She's fighting tooth and nail, and I happen to know that. I've had the privilege to get to know her over the last few weeks, and I'm telling you that you'd be very impressed. The quality of legal representation that she's providing, to me, is top shelf. Judge Hatchett, everybody. Now, here's another guy, brother from another mother, right? You know, we practiced law together. I actually stood up at his wedding. And Bobby will recall that when I was in state legislature, he's like, man, that politics thing is your thing, man. I ain't with it. I said, Bob, I hate to tell you this, but you're like a natural at it. You're great at it, and you need to do it. He said, no. But you know what? Bobby Champion, a great lawyer, talented musician, heeded the call of the community, stepped up, ran for office, recognizing that you may not want to be in office, but if the community needs you there, you got to go there. I'm sorry. That's just the way it is sometimes. He got drafted, ran for state legislature, won, and then when the Senate seat opened up, walked into that and is heading very quickly into, what is this going to be, your third term as senator? Second term as senator. But you've been in there now for like 8 years. And Bobby, if you want to know some of the legislation that he's fought for, I fought for to improve the expungement law. Bobby got it done. I fought to ban the box. Bobby got it done. Nearly everything I was fighting for when I was in the state legislature, Bobby has actually brought it in. And Bob, we know you're going to get us felon reenfranchisement, but because that's what's next. But Bobby has been ever faithful to the cause of justice and uses his office not as a typical politician, but as a social justice organizer who happens to hold political office. Bobby Champion, everybody. So with that, Misha, why don't you kick it off for us? And if you don't mind, I mean, obviously I want you to say whatever is on your heart, but if you can give us a little bit of, you know, how starting with the Jamar Clark case, how the ball really started getting rolling that it ultimately ended up in the United Black Legislative Agenda. Kick it off for us, if you would.
Hi, everyone. Is the mic on?
Yeah,
there we go.
They're getting
you guys
ready.
hear me? Awesome. So this all started actually right after Mike Brown passed away. Some young black people were getting together, feeling really distraught and hurt, and knew that they weren't the only people feeling that way, but feeling like there wasn't a space for us to grieve and to see the other people in our community that support what we're doing. So I actually met up with Wintana one night at around 1 a.m. when all the riots were happening in Ferguson. And we started thinking about what we could do to show that Minnesota supported what was happening. At around 2 a.m., we decided that we were going to shut down a highway. By about 4 o'clock the next day, we had 1,500 people shutting down a highway in Minnesota. And that was the first time we had done anything together. It came together so organically. But we thought we were just going to do it one time, and it was going to be over with. And a lot of people in Minnesota thought, yeah, we want to show support, but this doesn't happen here. And so a week later, we know that the officer wasn't indicted for Eric Gardner. We decided we had to shut down a highway again. From there, momentum built and young people got involved, high schoolers, college students, and we moved to starting an inside-outside approach, which meant that we were going to agitate from the outside through protests and showing support from a lot of people in the community, but then we were also going to build on that by doing legislative work and presenting policy that we thought would actually help the disparities in the state of Minnesota. So all that energy that came from us shutting down that highway the first time was actually moved to the legislature because people wanted to know what next steps were, and we were able to bring them to that. The night that Jamar Clark was killed, some young people who had started their own organization called Black Liberation Project decided that they were not going to leave the police precinct until they were arrested. That turned into an 18-day occupation of a police precinct that happened at the end of November in Minnesota, which means it was literally snowing. We were outside for 18 days in the snow, 24/7. What we saw at the 4th Precinct was what Minnesota likes to think that they are, which was sincere and real community. There were clothing drives, food drives, places for homeless people to stay. There was hot food 24/7. And I remember one night after 5 people were shot by white supremacists in front of the 4th Precinct who came to intimidate us. I remember being distraught, exhausted, hurt, in pain, and being on the phone on a conference call with someone in the car. And I step out of my car, and I'm thinking, I can't do this anymore. And I step out of the car, and there's 300 people of all different races, religions, singing together in the snow as the snow falls, 10 o'clock at night around fires. And I realized that this was what we really were trying to bring ourselves to. This was the community that was sincere and that was real about addressing its issues. From there, the governor really wanted us to get off the 4th Precinct's lawn. So we met with him and he asked us what we wanted. And we said we need money to address the racial disparities in the state of Minnesota because these killings don't happen in a vacuum, as Keith says. It doesn't happen because simply because of whatever. It is an economic disparity. It goes deeper than just the racial politics. And we knew that if there were less disparities, there was more of an opportunity for us to have real conversations and start to eradicate the killing of innocent and unarmed Black people.
Thank you, Misha.
Yeah.
And adding to that story, if you could sort of pick up where Misha left off, Wintana, you know, you were doing a lot of things together, but you actually had your own lane. You know, could you kind of build on where Misha left off?
Yeah, definitely. Hey, y'all. Like Representative said, my name is Wintana Melakine, and picking up on the idea of us working in our own lanes, you see a lot of different folks here, from members of the legislature to activists, and the way we set up the UBLA, which is a coalition of Black organizations, Black-led organizations in Minnesota. Is that we said everything that we add to our policies, like everything we add to our vision, we have to agree on. And the reason why we chose that is because we knew that there are certain things about the activist culture and there are certain things about policy culture that we just don't align on. But outside of that, there are millions of things we do agree on. And that's kind of how we laid out this platform where we could get these different folks together. So as an example of staying in our lanes, there was a time where the Republican Speaker of the House in Minnesota refused to hear any bills on racial equity. And so me and Asha Long back there from Black Lives Matter went to his office and just occupied his office for 24 hours and just sat there and refused to leave. And then he met with us and he's like, okay, he called the governor like, okay, can you get these people out of my office? We didn't leave, we stayed. And while that was happening and opened up conversations, they were like, well, they're not gonna leave unless you hear this or that, and started conversations I think Senator Champion can talk about more. And that was kind of a way that we stayed in our lanes. We make sure we respected each other's tactics and let each other do what it is that we do. Jeff is very highly qualified when it comes to like writing policy. So he was very much a part in like actual crafting agenda points when it comes to like what our demands, legally wise. And so that's just kind of like an example of how everyone had their own part and they played a lane. There was one point at the end of session where there was a body camera bill, a really bad body camera bill, and it was about to pass. And it was, session ended on Sunday. This was Friday. It had its first hearing. And so I showed up to the hearing. It was going to pass, and we had the option of just going home or getting involved. And so instead of going home, we actually called a lot of young black folks. A lot of them were from that group that Nisha mentioned, which is Black Liberation Project, and those folks showed up, about 50 of them, 50 black youth stayed at the legislature all day to the point that they lobbied every single senator. Like, all of the senators, 60-something senators, at least the Democrats, were all spoken to. And by the end of that day, we had flipped the votes. The governor had actually sent out an email saying, I'm going to veto this bill because it is a bad bill, telling a Democratic leader, Senator Latz, who had been the one championing for this bill. He actually told him, like, no, I'm not passing your bill. Democrat or not, I'm not passing your bill. And we were able to then go and collect votes from other senators. That's when Senator Latz found out he didn't have the votes to win. And so we just kept escalating and escalating. And then leadership at NOC, our policy director, started negotiating with the governor and having conversations. And that actually later on led to how we were able to accrue $35 million in racial equity funds. It was through all of us playing our lanes and respecting each other and, you know, making sure that we don't shame protesters and like belittle policy folks, and making sure that everyone's respected and everyone has a lane and that lane is honored and supported.
Well, thanks a lot. So if you don't mind, Jeff, I'm going to skip over to Senator Champion. And just, Bobby, if you don't mind diving in here a little bit, of course, you know, make the comments you feel are right, but I'd like you to sort of talk about the legislative side of this and kind of what you were seeing over there. And also, if you would, Bobby, we all know, and when Tana and Misha already alluded to it, there are different cultures. And both of us, I'm talking about you and I, have operated in both, as everybody up here has. I remember, and Jeff remembers well, that, you know, I led plenty of protests in my day, but at the same time, it was clear to me that Misha and Wintana was the ones doing it now, you know, and we better back their play. But at the same time, Bobby, you were over there in the legislature. You were, you know, one of the guys in, you know, in the ties and stuff, and like I am. And how did you deal with the protesters? Because they're not always, well, I hope y'all don't mind me saying this, you're not always coming, being polite is not the most important thing to y'all all the time, am I right? And you follow, right. And so, but in this environment of the Capitol, you know, we're shooting live bullets, but it's all so polite. You know what I mean? Can you talk a little bit about that from your perspective?
First of all, thank you, Congressman Ellison and all the others on the panel. It is true that when all the various groups were out in the street, that was very important for us as legislators, because that gave us the opportunity, the continued opportunity, to say, well, you see, we're not alone. You see that there are others out there who are saying the very same thing that we're saying. So I want to pause there for a second, because I want you to see that, but also I want to take you back to lead us to that moment. Because sometimes what people do is that they take a snapshot of that moment, but they don't take a look at everything that led to that moment that was helpful. For an example, we know that in that same year that the Atlantic in 2015 wrote an article that he praised on Minneapolis, you know, saying, marveling at the city's seemingly contradictory accomplishments of high employment, prosperity, and affordable housing. So this is all in the backdrop. But then it was the Washington Post that responded with an article in February 2015 asking, if Minneapolis is so great, why is it so bad for African Americans? Right? And the Star Tribune, by proxy, reported a decline in black household income as captured by the Census Bureau. This led to Governor Dayton and others starting to have a conversation about, well, what should we do or a continued conversation. This is why I say it's a continued conversation, is because you got to go back to 2011 when Governor Dayton, well, even before he became Governor Dayton, he was candidate Mark Dayton. We put together a meeting at the Minneapolis Urban League for him as a candidate to talk about if he was to become governor and if he was to get our support, what would he do? And we put some thoughts and demands on the table around one, to make sure that there are commissioners of color and not just in the Civil Rights Department, right? We talked about wanting to have business with the city. And in addition to that, Congressman Ellison, we also had him do two things. He committed that if he became governor, that he would come back to the great north side of Minneapolis and have an economic summit.
Minnesota may not know, but North Minneapolis is the North Omaha. It's the neighborhood. It's the neighborhood that Freddie Gray got shot in. It's the, you know what I mean? It's the neighborhood where the African Americans are large in numbers and often does not have the full complement of investment that other parts of the community have. So just to, you got a North Minneapolis wherever city you're in. So sorry, Bobby.
Congressman. And so here's the other interesting point about that. So North Minneapolis is where there's a large concentration of African Americans and others, and very diverse. But also, we had never had a sitting governor come to North Minneapolis in 24 years. So 24 years. So here we now have Governor Dayton, who's honoring this commitment that he made. He did not come alone. He came with 6 commissioners. And we had some African American commissioners that came with him, because that was a part of this discussion. So community business leaders presented issues and proposed solutions. So we didn't just say it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. We said it's bad, and here's a proposed solution that we know, Governor, that you could change. And that was important, is because the conversation continued from there, even to the Viking Stadium, for an example. There was a discussion. So the governor came in 2011. Viking Stadium discussion came up in 2012. They needed votes because there was a cross-section of people that says we want the People Station built. And the community was saying, hey, if they want this stadium, then we should have an amendment that says there should be preference given to us in order to make sure that we are getting contracts and work. And so I said, hey, Governor, if you want my vote, I need an amendment on the bill. It led to an amendment on the bill. Now, Senator Hayden is also a part of this discussion. So whenever you hear any work that I was doing, Senator Hayden was right there too. He couldn't vote for the Viking Stadium because he has a district that says no. The Viking new stadium is in my district, so I could say yes, but. And that has led to, and this is important, Congressman Ellison, to $250 million that has been spent with women and people of color and veterans. So that's $250 million. So this is all a part of the conversation, and we just realized that, a revenue side of that. You, Congressman, now this is all a part of the conversation. You led the effort for Ban the Box. We passed Ban the Box after that. You led the effort initially, Congressman, around expungements. We then passed that. Now that leads us to this ongoing conversation now. We've been talking to the governor, talking to him about all these issues and challenges that our community is facing. So now when there's this disruption that happens in the streets, guess what we said to him? You see, Governor, this is exactly what we've been talking about. So now that pressure from the outside, not just with the governor, but also the Senate Majority Leader and also the leadership, that we could say to them that this is important and necessary. Now, we also had something that's also important, Congressman. We had empirical data that could back up exactly what we were saying, because you know in the legislature, they always say, oh, we don't want anecdotal information. We want numbers. And so Susan Brower, who is the demographer, and others help us make the case. And so that's how we're able to now push and work with the community, and not just get one-time funding, because the governor initially said $15 million when we were looking at a special session. We said that was never enough. But when we landed on the $35 million, it's from a lot of work that was going on, and we also asked for money in the tails. And anyone who's in the legislature understands that the tails means ongoing money, not just one-time spending. We got $35 million plus $17.5 million in 2017 and $17.5 million in 2018. So it's $70 million over 3 years that will be ongoing. But that's also because the community was able to come together. We were able to gain strength and support from the community, and the community was allowing us to be in our lane, and we were allowing them to do the work that they need to do. So as we came together to do it, we all began to understand that we were standing on the shoulders of giants. So we were not just the individuals. We may have been the individuals at that time, but we also understood that it didn't start nor will it end with us, but this is a continued collaboration that is important for us to embrace in order to make sure that we have continued success.
Turn to my friend of many years, Jeff Hassan. Jeff, if you went back to 1937 and you looked at a planning map for the city of Minneapolis, okay, here's what I'm saying. The planning map for the city, the official planning map document in 1937 has circles around North Minneapolis, and it says Negro slum. Negro slum. People, when I tell them this, they're like, come on. No, it doesn't. It does. And we can show it to you. So when you start thinking about, we start throwing around this many million and that many million, people think, well, why they need all that money? Because there has been a historic, consistent, enduring disinvestment in the community over the course of many, many, many years. Jeff has been fighting for justice for a long time, and now Jeff is the leader of the African American Leadership Forum, which in my assessment, and others can weigh in, but I think they played a critical role in trying to pull together the disparate elements of the community. Because you have office holders, you have activists, and but we also had this collection of leaders who could convene, at a place together to talk about how we transmit the street action into some legislative outcome. And I think everybody on this dais was part of that. But I think Jeff, you were right there in the center of that. And could you just talk about the Balancing Act and making sure that everybody's talents, gifts, and contributions were respected so that we could somehow come out with a tangible outcome?
Greetings, everyone. I see that most of the people here are from Minnesota, Minneapolis. So,
See there? See there?
Most. So I'm preaching to the choir a bit, but I think it's good. I think it's good for all of us to understand what took place, what happened, that it wasn't just magic that brought all this together. I would like to say that I was born in that Negro slum of North Minneapolis in 1951. I had the opportunity to attend an event last night at a local restaurant here put on by BALSA, the Black Law Students Association, and it was interesting because I kind of heard myself circa 40 years ago up on that stage, Black law students talking about the importance of what it is that they need to do today. So I want to provide a little bit of context to this whole conversation that we're having. So I went to law school back in 1973 with the express purpose of coming out and practicing in my community, representing my community. And over a period of time, I had the opportunity to do just that. My former law partner, Larry Reed, and I handled a number of police misconduct cases. And I'm going to just highlight them because this is context for where we are today, and I think a lot of people don't understand this. In 1981 or two, there were two elderly people, Mr. Smalley and Miss Weiss, 81, 82 years old, who were burned in a fire in their home in North Minneapolis when the Minneapolis police were conducting a training exercise for suburban police departments on how to do a police raid. Did you hear what I said? They were conducting a training exercise with live people 80-year-old seniors who were asleep in their bed. Here's what happened. They rammed through the front window, because the people lived in a kind of a shotgun kind of apartment, ran through the front window, threw a flashbang stun grenade into the apartment that rolled up under a chair, caught the chair on fire. The whole place went up in flames. The police officers ran into the building, saw the seniors in the bedroom sleeping, and left them there.
No.
And ran back out the window, and they perished in the fire.
Oh my God.
This is context, people. Then, in 1990, I represented Rayma Wiggins, a 78-year-old woman who was thrown down by a police officer outside of her home, had to have hip replacement surgery. Keith and I had the opportunity to try a case in front of African-American Judge Michael Davis in U.S. District Court in Minnesota. 15-year-old young man playing with another friend, shooting each other in the butt with a BB gun, got caught by a cab driver going by and say 2 black men with a gun, and an officer showed up, wasn't even called to the scene, but showed up outside of the apartment building with a sawed-off shotgun. This 15-year-old boy ran out the door. They shot him in the back with a sawed-off shotgun. He lost 15 pints of blood. Fortunately, he lived. Now, Keith and I tried that case. Keith has always been a do-gooder. He brought the case into the office. He said, "We need to take this case." I said, "Keith, I don't think we should take the case." He said, "Why?" I said, "First of all, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. The father's sitting out in the parking lot drinking beer with a friend. White folks aren't going to understand what a 15-year-old boy is doing, running around at 1 o'clock in the morning in an apartment building, shooting each other in the behind with a BB gun." But Keith prevailed upon me. We tried an excellent case. We lost. Okay, and I want to mention this to Judge Hatchett because she's coming to Minnesota. In U.S. District Court, you get outstate jurors who have a completely different relationship with their police and community than folks in the urban area. And one of the things that I determined after trying a couple cases, some successfully, some not so successfully, is I started bringing cases in state district court just because I knew I'd get an urban jury. And so in 1996, represented a 13-year-old girl who was down at the city center. Most of us from Minnesota know city center in Minneapolis, with a bunch of friends. They were being loud. Police were called to the scene. A 6'5", 215-pound police officer took this 13-year-old girl down into the basement, put her into a squad car, and smashed her face against the rain gutter on the police car, broke out all of her front teeth. Okay? So this is the context. I was getting ready to cuss. This excrement just didn't happen, okay? It's been going on repeatedly. So that brings us to November of 2015 and Jamar Clark. Young man, the facts are disputed, but there's no dispute on the fact that 2 police officers took him out of the residence, and one of them threw him to the ground and ended up shooting him in the head with his gun. Now, what unfolded from there is kind of giving context to this whole conversation about what followed afterwards. As Misha and Wintana talked about, protests occurred. Members of our organization, the African American Leadership Forum, we have a number of attorneys. We took witness statements from eyewitnesses to the actual shooting at the Minneapolis Urban League. And so, as people alluded to, we have our lanes that we were working in. We were working in the lane in which we could best serve. So after about 15 days or so, the mayor of the city of Minneapolis called me, called Keith, called Bobby Joe, and a number of others, and said, "Hey, look, fella," and by the way, the mayor is married to the co-chair of our organization, okay? So let me make that clear. and said, look, people, we have a senior citizen high rise that's a block away from where the occupation is occurring. North Point is a community health center where the bus lines and streets were cut off so that people couldn't get to their health care. There was burning taking place, and people were complaining. As Keith knows, he's been an environmental activist for some time. People were complaining because we have the highest incident of asthma. And so she said, would you support me in a press conference to call for opening the street? We'll move the protesters to a different area. There's areas immediately adjacent. And so we agreed to do that because we felt that while we all supported the demonstration and the protests, it was also important for the rights of the people of the community who live there to be respected. But what happened as a result of that is that we were viewed as traitors, okay? Because we were viewed as not supporting the protests and demonstration it was taking in the street. We were now aligning ourselves with the system or with established institution, okay? So you understand the context in which we're talking about. So we're all lovey-dovey up here now, but that wasn't the case. That wasn't the case. And so Keith alluded to our role in bringing the groups together. That's not true. There's a gentleman who brought all these groups together, and he's not here, but I want to give him all the credit he deserves. His name is Al Flowers, okay? Now, Al is a very unique individual, okay? Al and I used to not get along at all. And we've been very clear with each other about that history. But Al is a person who works with all these organizations. He knows, I didn't know Misha. I didn't know Wintana before all of this happened. Al knew them. He worked with those organizations. And he also, when he saw that I started working with Bobby Joe and Jeff and all that, he was okay with me, right? And so Al Flowers is the one who brought us all together. Al is a community activist. Sometimes you don't even understand what Al is saying because he changes thoughts 2 or 3 times in one sentence. But he was the catalyst for bringing all these groups together. One of the things that Wintana referred to, when we brought the groups together, and this is key for folks in Minnesota or outside Minnesota, we agreed to operate by consensus, which I believe is critical to how we were able to get the work done. Meaning that if we didn't agree on an issue, it would fall off the table, okay? We would only move forward on those issues on which we all agreed. And I use and you'll find we as a community usually end up falling out about those things we don't agree on and forget about the 99% of things that we do agree on. And I always use my wife and I as an example. My wife is Christian, I'm Muslim. She's never going to convince me that Jesus Christ is God. I'm never going to convince her of the otherwise, right? But we love each other, we get along, and we've been together for 25 years. We respect each other. There's some things we just don't agree on, right? And so that's what happened with this group. We came together, Black Lives Matter, Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, Minneapolis Urban League, African American Leadership Forum, Council on Minnesotans of African Heritage, and the Somali Alliance. And we talked about what can we all reach agreement on around employment, around criminal justice, around health, education, and the like. There were some heated arguments. There were some disagreements. At some point, people were asked to leave the room, okay? But we continued the conversation. Wintana and I met personally and tried to talk about how we could get together. And as a consequence, that led to this group, the United Black Legislative Agenda, coming together. We invited Senator Champion and Senator Hayden to tell us what they were working on. They said, hey, fellas, here's what can get done we love all this other stuff you're doing. Yeah, you're fellow too, okay. Here's what we can get done in this session. We conformed our agenda, what Senator Champion and Hayden told us would fly in the session, and really, Bobby Joe and I were talking before we got started. We didn't know until the last week and the last day and probably last hour that this was going to get done. So I'll end with that. But it was an unprecedented, and I would say it's still fragile. You know, it's still a work in process. It's not like, you know, we've gotten over the hump. We're continuing to work on the legislative agenda for the 2017 session, and hopefully we'll get bigger and better things done this session.
So before I go to Ms. Castillo and Judge Hatchett, Misha has a critical point to make here, and so Misha, why don't you go for it?
So what I really want you all to get out of this is to keep in mind that our goal is the same. Even if our strategies don't, like speaking to what Jeff Hassan is saying, even if our strategies don't always look the same, our goal is the same. So it takes multiple types of strategies. It takes many different facets. And the fact that we decided to work together to build that, it was almost like a rotary. Like we keep talking about staying in our lanes. Everyone has something to add to this movement. It's just about finding who you are and putting that into it. And so I think that it's really important that we keep that in mind when we talk about these things, is that we're not going to agree on everything, but if the goal is the same, we don't have to all have the same strategy. White supremacy is deep, it runs deep, and it permeates throughout this entire system. So it's not going to be one strategy that beats white supremacy. You know what I'm saying? It's going to take a lot of different strategies. And so even if we don't agree all the time, we still have the same goal, and that's what really united all of us.
And that's right. And yeah, Montana, why don't you weigh in, and then we'll go straight to Valerie.
Just to add more context to that, on the day that the verdict was coming out around non-indictment for Jamar Clark, we got invited to watch the indictment by our county attorney. And when we walked in the room, it was a lot of UBLA members. I think we were in formation a little bit. The idea had been around. When this happened, like, there were people in the UBLA that weren't even talking to each other, that were still upset about what happened at the occupation. But when Mike Freeman said no indictment, all you saw was all of us screaming. All you saw was all of us crying. All you saw was all of us standing together. Like, there's a photo of me, Misha, and Steve from the Urban League, and we're just all standing there questioning Mike Freeman. And that's like the clearest point of, yes, some of us were going to go outside and we were going to yell and scream and occupy that building, and some of us were going to go file an appeal, and some of us were going to go work on a lawsuit, and some of us were going to go work on laws. But at that moment, we were all standing literally in a row, in alignment, knowing what just happened wrong, but we all had different tactics to go get to the solution.
And I just want to say to you all that it takes a tremendous amount of character to say, I don't think that what you're doing is the right way to get where we're going, but you do that, and I'm going to do my thing, and we'll figure out how to we'll meet up in the right space and time. There is a certain human, impulse to condemn people who don't see it the way you see it. But at the end of the day, no movement can cannibalize itself. And that may be the most important thing about this session. And again, I always say that a small group is often bigger than a big one, because people can really participate in a small group, where in a big, huge group, you really can't. But the one thing that I hope that people who are not from Minnesota can maybe extract from this conversation is, there will be horrible incidents that happen, but if you can just stick to it and respect the other person, you can get some progress out of it. So let me just say this. All of us are talking about these issues from an activist point of view, lawyers, all that kind of stuff. But these horrible incidents happen to people. They happen to people. Jamar Clark's family lost their son. Valerie lost her son. And as a father of 4, I can't even begin to, it would shake me up too much to imagine losing any one of them. If I imagine it, I don't know if I could keep going on this panel. And I'm not trying to evoke emotion here, but I just want to just give people a sense of how deep it truly is. So Valerie, hats off to you for your courage and your ability to see through your tears and understand the broader context of what happened to Philando. And thank you for being here with us today. Please share with us what you'd like to say. Give a hand to her, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Senator Ellis, for having me here today.
I'm just a representative.
Representative. Yeah, for right now.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for having me here today, and I just wanted to talk about Mr. Field. Mr. Field was my only son, and he was a gentleman. And right now, it's not about him anymore, it's about humanity. My son died for a cause, and that cause is for things to change here in the United States of America, not only in Minnesota, but all over the country, because you see that these issues carry on further than Minnesota, the police brutality and the killing of our young people. And I am here because I have been given a torch from my son and God, and they're watching over me to make sure I say the right things in the right context. But his death was just so overwhelming, and I know God knew that I couldn't handle the pain and the heartache by myself, so he shared it all over the world with people that didn't even know me. They cried for my son, because we all got a bird's eye view of actually what does happen when you're not looking. You don't see it, but this time you got a chance to see it with your own eyes. The eyes don't lie. So they can say whatever they want to say and try to criticize the victim and dig up dirt, but there was none. I taught my son everything a two-parent household would teach their child, but it was just me. I taught him how to be independent, work for a living, and obey the law. My son lived by the law, and he died by the law. And for that matter, what got me was I taught him, if you want to carry a gun, go about it and do it the right way. Be legitimate. The people that have permits to carry, they call themselves the good guys, because they go through the vigorous background checks and or issue the permits to carry, and they call themselves the good guys. So what happened to my good guy? What happened to my good guy? He did everything according to the law, and yet and still he ended up being killed in a car with the door locked with a seatbelt on. Now, what kind of a threat was he to that officer? What type of threat was he? He wasn't wrestling with him for his gun. He wasn't running. He wasn't selling cigarettes. He wasn't selling CDs. He wasn't doing anything to antagonize this man to kill my son. So with that being said, what do we do now? You know, it's been going on for so many years that it's just absolutely crazy, because when they let him go back to work, I was infuriated. I'm like, okay, so in other words, you're just saying my son is just another statistic. Not on my watch. Not on my watch. No, that's not going to happen. We getting him out of there. I went right on TV. Yes. My son didn't deserve to die like that, and no other human being needs to die like that, because this is not the way God intended for us to coexist on this earth. We're fighting a spiritual battle right now. It's past my son. It's about humanity, because if he get away with doing this time, it's going to continue to happen. They're acquitted. They don't even make it in the courtroom. Once you don't make it in the courtroom, then they can't cross-examine this guy, and then he's going to be acquitted. So, I mean, it gets to the point where you just say, well, okay. No. It's time to rise up and wise up. But with that being said, you know, it's just one of those things. My son was the sacrificial lamb. He is the one that's going to bring about change in this country. We need to incorporate different laws here in Minnesota and then try to expand that to the nation. Because the thing that happened with him, if the right decisions are not made, then this country is going to divide. And if the country divides, then how does that look to other nations? How does that look to China or Russia? We don't have solidarity in our own country, so that makes the whole country vulnerable. So we as people, we need to start embracing one another and working collectively to try to solve some of these issues as far as our people, African-American people, because there are a lot of interracial marriages now. So you're having all these different interracial kids. So they just as scared as the black folks is because their kids are black now. So everybody's scared. You better be scared. But yeah, it's a collaboration of unity, and we just have to start at the belly of the beast. We got to start from ground zero in the middle. We have to start in the middle and branch out and see how we can form a better unity in the nation. There are a lot of laws that need to be addressed. Bobby Champion have been working diligently on that for years, but he hasn't had enough backing to get a lot of these bills passed. And we need to step up our game and work with these people to try to make some changes, because that's the only way we're going to be able to coexist on this planet.
Thank you, Valerie. Now, Judge Hatchett, before we open up the dialogue and kind of get more folks involved in this discussion, could you, is there some things that you might be able to give us some broader context on in terms of what you've heard today?
Yes, and I thank you so much, Mr. Congressman. And I just appreciate it. Although I am not from Minnesota, you and others have opened your arms of support toward me, which I am very, very grateful for. Obviously, I'm going to be there a lot and will need you, all of you. I whispered to Misha in her and embraced her this morning in a very private moment, because as the sister said, there are lanes, but everybody's gotta play their lane. And that does not mean that there won't be intersections of these lanes as we cross over, because there will be times when everybody will have to play their lane, but we will all have to come together. And I remind you, and I'm just going to be very, very brief because I really want to hear from the audience, and nobody can follow Ms. Castile. I mean, I am just, before I say anything else, let me just say I count it a privilege to be representing her in this important matter. And I have promised her that she is going to get the best that I and my team have, because I am committed. When I first embraced her in her home, I didn't come as Judge Hatchett. I came as one black mama coming to see about another black mama, as I have sons Philando's age. And so we are at a critical time, and this collaboration could not be more important. And I remind all of us of what Martin Luther King said, that either we will live together as brothers, and I'll help him out and add sisters, brothers and sisters, or we will perish separately as fools. And that's real. Now, he was talking about a broader human context. And so this is our challenge. But this is not a new challenge historically, legally, as the congressmen and others will know. This is not a new challenge. Thurgood Marshall and Martin Luther King went head to head. I mean, we talking about knock down, drag out arguments, because Thurgood did not agree with Martin's strategy of protest.
Come on now.
And he felt that the change had to go only in the route of the courts. But each of them played a critical role, because Thurgood Marshall had to fight the legal battles, and Martin had to take the battle to the street. But then there was a critical intersection of those kind of strategies, and I don't want us to lose track of that just because we are running different lanes does not mean that there are not critical intersections, and I can't say that loud enough. And so I come to just encourage us to stay true, to be authentic in this mission. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. And just one last thing I'll say to you, that you have, Ms. Castile and her family know this, but this community needs to know this. You know, people see me on the bench. I've stepped beyond the bench. I've started a national law firm based in Atlanta, because I cannot be quiet on this. I just can't be quiet. And I have to leverage the fact that millions of people know me and I think trust me, because this is greater than us in this room. And if we don't get it right now, I don't know what I say to my sons and my grandsons that I didn't try to get it right on my watch.
All right.
And that I left it for them to clean up. And so at the press conference, and I'm through, I said, this time, you know, we've got to do it differently. And it is my goal for this case, Mr. Congressman, to be a landmark decision that moves this nation to higher ground.
Well, thank you, Judge. Awesome. And so the takeaway from this session, and everybody has said it, is that if you sing for justice. If you write poetry, write some justice poems. If you organize protests, organize some protests. If you practice law, practice law. If you're right. But whatever that you do it, right? And we all will argue about it on the way, but at the end of the day, as Misha said, we are heading in the same direction. And it's important for me to always just remind us that, you know what, our country, I mean, we're all here at the Black Caucus, you know, and some of us got fancy degrees and all like that. Great, awesome. But we all, you know, for 246 years were legally purchasable and owned, right? America was a slaveholding society longer than it wasn't. Think about that. Generations of black people born, lived their whole lives and died, and if they ran away, they committed the act of theft of themselves, a crime. That's who we are. For 100 years after that, second-class citizenship, and it's only been about 50 years that anything else has existed in America. When you start telling people this, they say, oh, you're bringing up old stuff. I mean, what are you talking about? I was born in American apartheid. I'm 53 years old. And we act like, oh, you know, that was a long time ago. And yet, on the 4th of July, 1776, we're celebrating liberty. What else was happening in 1776, right? So I think it's incredibly important. And it's also important to remember that every one of us, no matter what color we may be, as Americans, have a part of this story. Because if there's one thing that helps you understand America, it's understanding race in America. And if you don't understand it, you won't understand anything about it. It's critically important to understand this. Slavery was a worldwide system. West Africa, Liverpool, the Caribbean, radiated from there. And every African immigrant who comes here is so absorbed into this thing. So like Wintana's family comes from Eritrea, and yet here she is on this stage talking about Black Lives Matter, because they don't know that when they don't care where she came from, right? She's just you're one. Right. They don't care. And another thing, 1965, we all know about the Voting Rights Act. We all know about the 64 Civil Rights Act. But what you may not know, which is equally important, is there was an immigration bill that allowed non-white people to come to the United States in unprecedented numbers. So that was civil rights law as well, right? So please, check your history. Let's get you involved in this dialogue. What do you all have to say? Let's get Erin May. She's going to be walking around. Sylvia, what do you want to share with? Sylvia is one of the leaders in the African American Leadership Forum, and Sylvia, you got the
Good
mic.
morning. Thank you, everybody, very much for your contribution and commitment to our people. So I live in Minnesota, and I work for a wonderful company called Medtronic. I'm very active in the community, and the leaders in Medtronic, we're fortunate to have a really good CEO that's very compassionate and is striving for inclusion and diversity for all of his employees. So when the incident happened, it really, rocked all the black employees in Medtronic. People were crying and didn't know what to do, because we had to show up in the workplace and it was business as usual, which we couldn't do because we watched something really horrific on the live video. And our CEO was sensitive enough to call the black leaders together in a private room, and we had that discussion, and he asked us, what can we do to help the situation? So we came up with our proposals, but I want to look to the panel and ask, as in Minnesota I think we still have the highest number of corporate 500 companies per rata in the United States. What can all of the corporations in Minnesota do to help this cause? We can do work to address economic development and address the unemployment rate and the economic disparities and health disparities and education disparities, but what do we do to help this issue of police injustice against our people?
And if I may just add, Sylvia invited me to talk to the black employees at Medtronic about a week ago. And oftentimes the corporate community is seen as like not a friend or at best doesn't care. But yet the CEO and Sylvia, they really demonstrated real concern. So I think that we've got to find a way for everybody to participate. What can the corporate community do?
Can I
John,
talk
yeah,
a
either
bit?
anybody.
First, I want to tell everybody in the audience that the African American Leadership Forum has established a scholarship in the name of Philando Castile. And I mention that just so that you know you can go online and click on donate, and you'll get a drop down for the Philando Castile scholarship. Right now it's $10,000, and it's going to go to a or multiple graduates of J.J. Hill Elementary School, which is where Philando Castile worked. And I told Ms. Castile last night that my oldest son actually attended J.J. Hill as a young child. So I just wanted to let the audience know that, so if you want to contribute to that scholarship, it's available. But to the question, what can the corporate sector do? The African American Leadership Forum is actually engaged in ongoing conversations with the public, private, and philanthropic sector about making equitable investments in our community. And in point of fact, we have a public sector forum coming up on November 18th at the Robert Jones University of Minnesota Research Outreach Enrichment Center, also known as UROC, in which we're bringing together the state, the two counties, the cities, school districts to look at their investment in African American businesses for purchasing professional goods and services and construction. What we already know is that those public entities are spending billions, with a B, billions of dollars, and we're not getting any of it. The entities that do keep the statistics show that African Americans get less than 0.1% of those billions of dollars. We're going to change that. We're having a similar conversation with leaders in the private sector. And so there have been ongoing conversations with leaders at corporations like Medtronic, Wells Fargo, General Mills, Cargill, all the major corporations. And we hope to have a similar forum in the spring of next year. And this is, as I tell people that I work with, I'm not into going to conferences and attending conferences just for the sake of attending a conference.
Right.
If we're not going to accomplish something or get some results of it, then I don't even want to be involved. So this is just a first step to have us tell us what your numbers are, how much money are you spending every year on purchasing goods and services. How much are you spending? You know, we first had to deal with the WMB, Women Minority Business Enterprises. Yeah. Okay, how much you spending with black folks? And inevitably, it's so small, it hardly even registers on the chart. That's what we're going to ask them to show us. Once we find out what we already know, then we're going to talk about, okay, now what are we going to do to change this? And that will make such an immense impact on our community. Can you imagine if they're spending, let's say, $3-4 billion, if we get 1% of that, just 1%, the change that would make in businesses and employment, and research shows that black folks employ other black folks in greater numbers than other do. And so it will have such a ripple effect on employment, on education, on health, you name it, on down the line. So in response to your question, Sylvia, those are some of the things that our organization is doing to address the corporate piece.
Just one footnote, if I could add to highlight what you just said, is be careful. I've sat on 3 Fortune 200 boards. Be careful to define what minority spend is. Mm-hmm. That's the point that he's making. That is, I just want to put a flashlight on that one, because if it's veterans, if it's right. women, if it's, so really how much of that spend is with African Americans? And I'm not talking about shell companies where there's a black person put out there to look like that there is ownership, but really serious ownership.
Right.
Misha, did you want to say something? Or one of you two?
I think Wantana has.
Wantana, you got it?
Well, I have a list. So I work at NOC, Neighborhoods Organizing for Change, and we work a lot on economic justice. So, of course, there are the things like supporting $15 minimum wage and getting earned sick and safe time. But specifically, I think there's a conversation around how economic justice ties directly into police brutality. Police target African Americans, but particularly African Americans in poor neighborhoods. You hear about the case of the police officer that was raping black women at police stops, and then he actually ended up raping a woman that had a higher profile, had more wealth, was able to hire an attorney. They target people that they know are poor, and so I think a conversation around a lot of this is also how do we get people out of economic situations so that when things do happen, they can afford the legal support, or at least can survive in society to do something about like what's happening to them. Specifically, Jamar Clark, his sister actually just passed away from a health disease. So after all of the stuff she went through, being at the protest, she was at the protest with me one day and had an asthma attack. After all of this, she wasn't able to afford, to have a stable place to live. She wasn't able to afford health care and all the resources she needs, and she's now left us. And it's hard to be a part of these fights if you don't make 15. So just getting your organizations to support the economic policies, because moving us out of these, not out of the communities, but out of the economic depression definitely helps. And I think specific like tactics in organizations, I would always say is volunteer hours. Very often folks go do like Habitat Humanity. Like, I want to see Medtronic and Target come volunteer at Black Lives Matter. Like, when are they going to come start making some protest signs? And I think another thing is putting out statements. So when Phil Fernando was killed or Jamar Clark, it would have been really cool to see some of these corporations put out statements that they feel the pain, and not statements that we stand with the police and community, but like we stand with these victims. I think is a great thing. Another option is to endorse this agenda, or at least parts of it. I know when I worked on Restore the Vote with Senator Champion, we worked really hard to get the support of the chamber to support this, and so getting organizations to support this UBLA agenda. And then also another step is getting the chamber itself to support the agenda. There's no reason that the Chamber of Commerce shouldn't be talking about how private prisons are actually worse economically, about how they create a pipeline. So like getting other corporations to join the conversation. And then two last things. Sorry, y'all, I think about this a lot. Not donating to police unions. Very often, a lot of companies are, they donate to everyone. They Republicans, Democrats, but police unions in particular are very, very racistly run and very often have a lot of power at the legislature. So just making sure we cut off their funding supplies. And the last thing is, I worked at, I won't name them. I worked at a corporation for 10 years, and there were no services for us. I actually quit around the time that Trayvon Martin was killed and became a community organizer, and there was never a service for me. So like providing services for folks that work in corporate spaces, and it sounds like you're doing that, but it can be really traumatic to like show up every day with a bunch of white folks and like the police just killed someone. So that's my list.
Can I just say this real quick? It's important, I think, for corporate America to get that, you know, if they take a position that we don't want to see wages go up, then basically what they're saying is that people are going to stay poor, and if they stay poor, then they're going to be susceptible to the dynamic where, you know, you end up in the situation where Jamar Clark or Freddie Gray or so many others, you know, just get ensnared. Why? Because the police are not separate from the overall system; they're part of it, and so basically the way I see this is that our society has said, we're not going to invest in housing, we're not going to pay fair wages, we are going to offshore your job, we're going to do all these things. And so because we know that's going to leave a lot of people just out, we're going to solve the people who've been set aside problem by police in prison. And so my argument to the corporate community, there is another way. In fact, you'd be richer and better off if you did not leave economic castaways and actually paid people so that they can buy your stuff and made sure that they now your quarterly profit margin might be a little lower if you did that.
At the beginning.
In the beginning,
Right.
But overall, you'd be better off. We've got to make this case. I talked to Chamber of Commerce one time, and they blew my mind because I was ready to argue with them or whatever. They said, our agenda is immigration reform, transportation, and workforce development. I said, mine too. And so, you know, I think that there is an evolution in the corporate community
Yes.
that is not going to undermine them. And I tell corporate community, if you're not trying to screw over workers, consumers, or the environment, we're all good. Medtronic, you're trying to put a pacemaker in somebody's heart to make them live longer. I don't have no problem with that. And so that's the real deal when it comes to corporate community. It actually enhances the viability of a corporate entity to have strong, healthy community, not weak, underserved, abused community. The brilliance that's locked up in the mind of a child in North Minneapolis, you might have the answer to the next invention,
That's right.
but if they don't ever develop that talent. Anyway, I just wanted to toss that in there. Let me keep getting to you guys. I don't want to talk up the
You mind
time.
if I
No, go dive
add
in,
one
dive
more
in,
thing?
Misha.
You know, this just came to me. We need corporations to put pressure on on legislators. We really do, because so often they think that they're appealing to a silent majority, and by having corporations, just imagine, we fight police union lobbyists constantly, and most of the time it's regular people with regular jobs who are trying to survive every day, coming out and trying to lobby in support of these bills. If we had corporate lobbyists who, in addition to fighting for their interests of the company, fighting for the interests of black people, think of how much further we can get, and think of how much of a unique way that would be to utilize what they're already doing. And I would just say, to what you're just talking about, we need to talk about reparations in a new way. Like, really, we sincerely do. If every single person in this room walked out later and talked about reparations, and we started to change the idea of what reparations actually are in America, we would get them. If we talk about it in terms of economic investment, if we change how people imagine reparations to actually investing in these communities, like getting $15 an hour, and we talked about that as reparations, people would be like, it would start to connect the link between slavery and why we are still where we are today. You know what I'm saying? And so if we could all walk out this room and say, okay, reparations ain't me getting a check in the mail and then going to invest in Cadillac and Kentucky Fried Chicken or Popeyes or whatever. You know what I'm saying? It is literal jobs, housing, funding for programs to help us.
Great. So look, let's get some more folks in here. We want to get, we got about a half an hour. It would be great to get at least 10 more people in this dialogue. I have to make some announcements. Forgive me for doing that. I know I'm the one over here breaking up the time. But at the end of this session, I'm going to lead a press conference on historically black colleges and how to put them on more stable economic ground. We're going to announce a piece of legislation that is going to be very important to HCBUs. We don't have any in Minnesota, but my mom went to one, my brother went, all of y'all know. So that's one thing. The other thing is, well, let's just do that for now. All right, keep going. Hey, good to see you, man.
Thank you so much. I have a question, but first I have an appeal. You all may not know it. I live here in Washington, D.C., and we benefited from Keith Ellison. So the brother who was talking earlier is about saying everybody's from Minnesota. I'm not from Minnesota. People in D.C. and the rest of America benefit, but we need your help because we can't vote for him. So you all got to keep sending them back because I suspect that there's some people in Minnesota who don't like him.
80% every year.
Now, having said that, my question is 53 years ago, when my hair was black and whatever, I was a teenager in high school, I got arrested in Columbus, Georgia, trying to go to an all-white library. And what was interesting is that during the demonstrations, the white people doing American apartheid found 40 Negro ministers, and I'm saying what was in the headline says 40 Negro ministers opposed demonstrations by youth group. My question is, what is the faith community, churches, mosques, synagogues, et cetera, doing in Minnesota? Are they supporting you guys? Are they part of this collaborative?
That's an awesome question. Go for it.
We have mixed responses. One person that I want to lift up right now is Pastor Danny Gibbons. He started a black church leaders organization. I can't remember the actual name right now, but and that they have been immensely supportive of Black Lives Matter, and I think that's part of the reason why Black Lives Matter has gotten so far in the state of Minnesota, because they lend us some legitimacy and they lend us a level of some foundation to the work that we're doing. On the other end, we sometimes do have ministers that really do not mess with us. We really do, and we have ministers that actually talk about us, like at church on Sunday, talking about how bad we are, and but that's not. We don't focus on that, right? Like the negativity is just trying to suck our energy and suck our power away, and so we focus on the church leaders and the mosques, and it's beautiful, the support that we have, and it's across all boards.
Jeff.
I thought I recognized you, brother, from Master Muhammad. Okay. I personally believe that our faith community is very involved in the community and the work that we're doing. For example, on the United Black Legislative Agenda, the executive of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Minnesota, CARE, Jelani Hussein, was involved in the United Black Legislative Agenda. On the African American Leadership Forum, in our bylaws, we require representation from the faith community. We require representation from the government public sector on our board of directors, and I believe we have a very activist faith community in Minneapolis and St. Paul. And to Misha's point, sometimes they don't agree with the position. And really, to her main point earlier, we all agree on what the ultimate objective is. We disagree on tactics and strategies. But I think we've matured to the point that we're not allowing that to take us off of our agenda.
And
Bob?
To that point, everything that's been said is true, and you also have other faith leaders like Reverend Jerry McAfee who will go out and protest if black people are not on construction sites, and he'll get arrested and stand there himself, right, and encourage others. Or Reverend Darrell Spence, who's in St. Paul, or Bishop Howe in North Minneapolis, or Steve Belton, who's also a minister and the president of the Minneapolis Urban League, or Reverend Russell. So there's a cross-section of leaders, and it's true, they all agree on the goal. They might sometimes disagree on strategy as to how to get us there, but they all are linked together and to concentrate on the goal. And so I think that is important to lift up.
Thanks for the point. You can, but you know what, Wintana? Why don't you make your point quick? But I do want to make sure that we get at least 9 more folks to have their say. But if you'd like to go, please feel free.
It's literally a quick sentence. The first organization, the first non-black organization to endorse the UBLA without me even asking them was actually Jewish Community Action. So they send out emails. They send out emails without me asking them. So it's actually been really amazing seeing the full religious community step up for this.
And I think on the 4th Precinct protest, you had a group of Somali imams come on out. You had Grant Stevens and them from Isaiah. I mean, there was good support, but I think the point really is that just help the way that you can help. And I would urge faith communities to not crash on the protest publicly, even if you don't think it's right. Misha talked about blocking the highway. Some folks were like, I don't know about that. But even if you don't think it's right, once you get up on the pulpit and start talking it down, that's not good either. If you really don't think that it's right, call Misha and say, Misha, I don't think what you're doing is right. And Misha's going to say, well, she's a respectful woman. She'll say, well, we do think it's right, but whatever. But once you go out to the community, once you go out to the press and you start saying, down with that, man, it's just not good. So
It's white supremacy permeating again.
Yeah,
That's how white supremacy will beat us.
yeah, so we cannot cannibalize this struggle for justice, right? So thank you all for that. That was a good question. Let's keep going.
Hi, my name's Eni Augustine, and I'm a fellow with the African American Leadership Forum. I myself am a first-generation American, a Nigerian of several different tribes. And one of the things that I've seen is how a lack of intersectionality, has literally torn our culture apart in Africa and here as well. You guys have talked about, staying in your lane and, making sure that you work on the issues that you agree on. And it sounds real nice and neat, but like we all know that things get crunk, right? So so I would just like, 2 or 3 actionable tips. So like when I'm in this situation, when it's all starting to go left, when people start shouting and getting in their feelings, what are 2 or 3 things that I can do to bring it back to the focus?
Very good question.
That is a bomb.
So that's a great question because I don't think we tried to sugarcoat it up here. No, and I'm not saying you're saying we did, but here's the deal. When you get into the meeting and people start getting into their feelings, what should leaders do to be able to refocus attention on the critical issues at hand, no matter where their political position may be? Y'all want to handle that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Lord, okay.
Actually, I can think of what we should not do more than what we should do, but why don't y'all take it away?
A very clear example that I'm just going to share. We actually, we were having our meetings. They were happening. It was like every other coalition, and then there was a specific day where some women on the panel called out misogyny. They're like, this is sexist. Like, you're not calling on us, you're cutting us off, XYZ was happening. It ended up turning into a shouting match. Folks was getting kicked out the room. It was a lot. Popped off. And so we had the option of being like, screw this, I'm done, whatever. You know what I mean? Or coming back to the table and just excluding the people that were upset. But actually what ended up happening was that Louis Porter from the Council on African American Heritage and Mr. Jeff Hassan ended up having conversations with folks. Individuals were having one-to-one meetings. We were having meetings of microgroups, and we consistently were having conversations. And we actually came back to the table, and we had very clear conversation about misogyny and like the oppression of women's voices. And that was actually a turning point for the table. That's when women started leading. That's when women started leading a lot of the policy work, a lot of the organizing, and folks were able to have a conversation around what went wrong, how did it go wrong. And the real big point was like, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? We could have been like, we beefed, we're gonna ignore it and keep going with the same style, but we actually did a complete 180, changed our culture, included more women. We also got more reflective on who's missing from the table, what African diasporic members are missing, what elders are missing. And so I think it's facing the problems head on, having conversations outside of this space, and then following up with a plan to take new action steps to make sure you're not recreating old methods.
Anybody else want to touch it?
Yeah, I want to talk about that because so what's interesting because this
You want to show them your battle scars first?
so I was alluded to as a misogynist, but the some of the comments were being made started to ring a bell with me. I said, my wife tells me some of those same things, and so I acknowledge, there's probably some blind spots that I have, and I agree. Well, my boy was the one that was going off with with the sister, right? And he wasn't having it. No, I'm not buying that, and he felt like I had dissed him because I had agreed that I may have those tendencies myself. And so, yeah, it got pretty heated. It wasn't pretty, but after the things died down, I did meet with Wintana and another young lady in which the conversation had jumped off, and we tried to work on it, and then ultimately, my boy came back into the conversation. I don't know that his feelings or attitudes had really changed per se, but he was willing to re-engage and has continued to re-engage as we move forward. One of the, I remember, I think a lot of this is generational because, Misha and some of the other young folks sit down and they say, well, how do you identify yourself with your pronoun? And I'm thinking, what the hell does that mean? What, me, my, and I, and all. So that part of that is generational. But the other thing is, the question was asked, well, what really stresses you about being at this meeting? And I'm sitting there thinking, nothing's stressing me. Shit, I've been doing this for 40 years. This is just the way it is, right? Stuff is going to break out. And so I expect that to happen. If things go smoothly, I'm kind of surprised. But if you've been doing this, Judge Hatchett, Bobby Joe, if you've been doing this for 30, 40 years, you expect stuff to jump off. Yep. And you have the experience to know how to deal with it, to, kind of address it. Don't get excited and too upset.
Part of that is also, too, that you're a black man in a room full of black people, and in that space, you were at the top of the hierarchy. So, of course, you're going to feel more comfortable.
I got the power?
I mean, that's not what I said.
Well, look, in answer to your question,
I do want to add, though, that it's important to keep in mind that we did not choose this work chose us.
That's right.
And that the ancestors put us in this space. And when we get in those moments, we need to remember that the ancestors put us all in that room together, right, to build. And it was not for naught. And so taking a second to breathe and remember that the ancestors brought us to that space,
right.
and that you need to overcome these differences to work through them is what's really going to push us, is what's really going to keep people on track. And, oh, wait, hold up. Yeah, that's right. My grandmama did. You don't even have to check somebody. You let their ancestors check them.
That's right.
So look, I've heard you guys say stick and stay. I've heard you say don't fear confrontation and don't fear self-evaluation. You all got something to learn. Come back. Take it seriously, not personally. Take a second to breathe. You got, and keep perspective on the bigger picture.
And that we may be in different lanes, but we have an important agenda ahead of us.
Yeah.
And that the enemy is not the person who disagrees with you in that meeting.
Right.
But you got to figure out where the common ground is, and that at the end of the day, we must be allies, even if our strategies are different.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Bob, did you want to say something?
That was well said, and I would just say, seek to understand, then to be understood.
Yeah. So let
And-
me now dive into this. Yeah. So now let me dive into a question. This question is related to the last question. This issue of women's empowerment and inclusion is very, very important. By the way, Ella Baker fought with them guys, and I do mean guys, of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference just to be acknowledged for her tremendous contributions. The civil rights movement simply couldn't exist without what women did for it, and yet, they did not. They probably got less credit then even than they do now, and now it's not that great.
Right.
And so I just think this issue of gender equality needs to be acknowledged. Now, there was a person here who, in my view, is a total hero. She had to go to another panel. Her name is Kimberly Crenshaw. Somebody just threw out the word intersectionality.
Yes.
We don't talk about intersectionality without Kimberly Crenshaw. She coined the term. Anyway, and I want you all to address this issue of how do we engage in gender inclusiveness. And I also want to tell you, she came to my office yesterday and said to me, look, if I say Mike Brown, and if I say, Eric Gardner, and if I say, Tamir Rice, we all know the men who have been killed in police violence, but we don't really know the women, although there have been tons of them, and they've been on tape, and, there's just a long, long list. And she started something called Say Her Name. Say Her Name. And one of the things she wants to do is to come to Minnesota and have a sort of a speak out on the issue of black women. And we're going to need your help. Will you all help us do this?
Absolutely.
We want to do it. We want to do it before November 8th, not because this is going to be congressional and you cannot campaign on the congressional resource, but wherever people come together and talk about issues of serious concern, the issue,
Keith,
yeah.
can I say this? And Jackie will love me for this, but on October 22nd, we're having a Black Women's Healing Conference called Baraza.
Okay, so
And
put that down.
that would be an ideal time for her to come. It's a weekend-long event, but focuses on black women and their health and their empowerment, et cetera. So that would be an
Where's
outstanding.
Aaron
And
so Aaron is
Yeah.
Aaron should connect with you guys on this,
Yeah.
and let's see what we could do to try to coalesce that, because whether we do it all on October 22nd or we do it slightly later, it wouldn't be bad to have two events in short distance from each,
Right.
time proximity on focusing on black women's issues. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Stella Whitney West.
Thank you, Congressman. And I apologize because I was late.
Stella, tell everybody who you are, please.
Oh, okay. Stella Whitney Weston. I'm the CEO for North Point Health and Wellness
That's
Center
right.
in North Minneapolis. And so, thank you. So I just have a couple of comments. And so, first of all, to the panelists and particularly the women leaders, stay strong. Stay with it, no matter what. If I can be of any assistance to you, happy to do it. One of the things that I've learned, there is tension. There's always going to be disagreements. I've had some of my fellow men leaders who have called me to task and said some pretty awful things, and even have gone, and this will happen, and I know it's happened to you, because we have a partnership with Hennepin County. All 7 county commissioners are all white. In the history of Hennepin County, they have never had a commissioner of color. But I've had folks who will go to those commissioners and speak against my organization, and yet some of those same folks would be out on your protest line. I'm just here to tell you. But you never hear me call them out. And what I do, first of all, stay faithful.
That's right.
And pray and just ask God for guidance and keep it moving, right? Because you have a higher purpose. The other thing is to realize that it takes all of us, no matter what it is that you are doing, do it and do it for your people, always. The other thing that I wanted to comment on, so Sylvia, when she said about corporate America, what can they do, corporate? I say follow Thor Construction, right? 3rd largest African-American construction company in the country has relocated their corporate offices to North Minneapolis.
Wow.
And a part of a $100 million development. So that's what corporate can do, right? Invest in those communities, bring the jobs. I know you got to bring some of your employees, but hire from the community. North Point, we have 400 employees, make good money. 60% are African American.
That's right.
Not people of color, but African American.
That's right.
All right? So we're about health and wellness, but it's also economic development. When corporations invest in the community, you are going to make sure that your investment is stable. Make sure that you invest in the education of the people in the community as well.
Thank you, Stella, and thanks for all the work you do. Also, let me acknowledge it. I just want to say, everybody, that Cora McCorvey, a number one of our bright stars, head of Minneapolis Public Housing, is here with us today, too. And Cora was brilliant last night on our housing forum, so that's how she does business.
Say, Keith,
Yeah.
can I talk about Stella's project,
Yeah,
the North
please.
Point, because it's a another demonstration of how we came together to work together. And so I was contacted by Stella and said, you know, look, we have this $67 million expansion in North Point, which is one of the most fabulous community health organizations in the country, and it's not moving. I said, well, what's happening, Stella? Well, we don't have the support of our commissioner in this area who needs to move it. And so to the brother's question, I contacted Alfred Babington Johnson, who is a leader in the faith community, and said, Babington, what's up with this? Babington contacted Bobby Joe, champion, and got a meeting with our commissioner, right? Me, Babington, Bobby Joe, Gary Cunningham, who's a former county commissioner, not a commissioner, but administrator himself, and we sat down with our county commissioner and said, what's up? And Bobby Joe and Babington have a good relationship with. Long story short, within a month, that
That's right.
$67 million expansion of North Point was approved, but only because we came together, we stayed in our lane, but then we intersected and came together to work. And then that project brought Thor Construction to the project to add to the $67 million to make it a $100 million project. And we're looking to develop that whole avenue. So just another example of us coming together, staying in our lanes, but intersecting where necessary to get things done.
So let me just tell y'all, we got a few. I'll take a couple of more because the thing is that it's almost at 11, and I got.